On Sunday the 18th of December in 2022, a 19-year-old man named Kadin Black was supposed to be spending the morning at his father's house to help look after the dogs as he did every Sunday. But strangely, after failing to show up that day, he would mysteriously disappear and hasn't been seen since. After noticing that Kadin hadn't arrived, his father Maurice then called up their neighbour Chris Foust to ask if he had seen his son, as at the time Kadin had been staying with him temporarily. However, Chris would respond by claiming that Kadin was likely asleep upstairs, so not wanting to cause a fuss, Maurice simply accepted that his son wasn't coming and continued on with his day as normal. But once Tuesday rolled around, Chris realised that he hadn't physically seen Kadin since Saturday afternoon, so he quickly made the decision to call Kadin's mother Cara to ask if he had perhaps travelled over to her house without telling anyone. But to his surprise, Cara would state that she too hadn't seen Kadin and had last spoken to him around 6 days prior. So, at this point, with nowhere else to turn, Chris decided to call the local police department to officially report Kadin as missing. However, despite the immense efforts of the authorities, after 15 months of investigating, Kadin still remains a missing person to this day, which has understandably led many to wonder, what really happened to Kadin Black? And more importantly, who could be responsible for his disappearance? Kadin Black was born on the 10th of December in 2003 to his loving parents Maurice Black and Cara Patterson, alongside his two brothers Jordan and Carter in the town of Wrightsville, Pennsylvania. Growing up, Kadin was described by his mother as being simply one of a kind, with an infectious laugh that never failed to brighten up the days of his family. But this positive and kind nature wasn't just restricted to the home, as Kadin would also spread joy across the whole community, whether that be through his ability to put smiles on his teachers' faces, or through his work as a community helper, where he mowed the lawns of his neighbours with the local kids apparently looking up to him as a big brother. So I think it would be safe to say that Kadin's selfless personality was certainly a huge aspect of his success. But on top of this, there was also an innate physical drive within him, which led Kadin to live quite an active lifestyle, as he would spend most of his free time either hiking, riding his BMX, or representing his school in a variety of different team sports. However, despite having quite a happy childhood for the most part, as with all families, there were of course a few issues from time to time, such as when Kadin's parents decided to end their relationship in 2007. But by all accounts, it would seem that this situation in particular would not cause too much distress for Kadin, as he was never far from his father, who only lived a short distance away within the same small town of Wrightsville. Kadin was a hard worker in school as well, with his brother Carter explaining that during football practice, Kadin was always there for his teammates and would make it a point to stay behind after practice to help them work on drills if ever needed. So, things were looking incredibly bright for Kadin moving forward, and many believed he would go on to be very successful in life. But it would seem that there was always something dark lurking within the young man, as according to his mother Cara, he would have temporary moments of depression and anxiety that would cause him to lose his head from time to time. But these symptoms would seem to get worse in 2019, when his mother was offered a promotion at work, which meant the family would have to pack up and move to Maryland, therefore forcing Kadin to have to leave his friends and wider family behind. During this time, it was clear that he was very unhappy, so much so that Kadin would eventually ask his mother if he could move back to Wrightsville to live with his father Maurice, as he couldn't handle being away from his friends for any longer. So in November of 2021, he would once again pack up his things and travel back to Pennsylvania, where he was reunited with his old life and quickly fell back into old habits. However, despite the initial improvements in Kadin's mental health, he quickly realised that living alone with his father came with its own challenges as well, and his behaviour would only appear to become more unstable as time passed, as for one reason or another, he would get into a heated dispute with the school bus driver, which would unfortunately end in the police being called. So, after just 10 months of living under the same roof with his dad, Kadin once again made the impulsive decision to move out, this time deciding to live with his close friend Ethan, alongside the rest of the Foust family, and soon after landed a job working for a moving company called Delauter's A1. However, although Kadin would eventually claim his innocence over the bus driver incident, this didn't stop the court proceedings from going ahead, and so he was scheduled to attend a hearing in January of 2023, where he had planned to defend his actions that day. But this court date would unfortunately never come, as during the month prior, an event would take place that would bring chaos upon the small town of Wrightsville and leave his friends and family utterly devastated. On Saturday the 17th of December, the 19-year-old would announce to Chris Foust that he was heading out for the evening and didn't know when he would be back. So, given that he had recently graduated from school and was now a somewhat responsible young adult, Chris didn't ask any further questions and simply told him to stay safe and have a good time. The teenager then left at some point in the evening, but as he had decided to stay out late that night, nobody in the house would be able to verify his return as they were already asleep. So as far as Chris was aware, Kidan had probably returned home in the early hours of the morning and was getting some much needed rest, meaning he didn't feel the urge to check on him. As in his words, it was not an abnormal thing for Kidan to go out all night, come home, sleep all day, and repeat. However, it wouldn't be long before Chris would receive a call from Kidan's concerned father, Maurice, as according to him, Kidan was supposed to go over to his house that morning to help look after the dogs as he did every week, but for some strange reason, he didn't show and was not answering his phone. So given the situation at hand, Chris would respond by explaining that Kidan was more than likely asleep upstairs as he had been out the night before, so not wanting to cause an argument with his son, Maurice simply accepted that he wasn't coming and simply continued on with his day as normal. But little did Chris know at the time that on this particular occasion, his assumption couldn't have been any further from the truth. On Tuesday the 20th of December, Kidan's mother, Cara Patterson, would receive a call that morning from Chris Foust, who was now beginning to get concerned for her son's safety as he had realised that he hadn't actually seen Kidan since the previous Saturday night, meaning he'd been out of the house for almost 3 days straight. So, as he was running out of options, Chris had quickly made the decision to call Cara to ask if Kidan had perhaps travelled over to her house without telling anyone. But to his surprise, Cara would respond by saying she too hadn't seen Kidan and had last spoken to him around 6 days prior when they were organising arrangements for their Christmas get-together in Maryland. So, at this point, it is unknown who made the next phone call, but it is assumed that Chris Foust then called the Delauter's A1 Moving Company, as he knew Kidan was supposed to be working that week, and given that he had only just recently started working there, he had hoped that Kidan would have surely turned up. But once again, the company would respond by stating that they had also not seen or heard from Kidan, as he had failed to show up for his shift on the Monday and was already late for his Tuesday shift. So, with nowhere else to turn, Chris then decided to call the local police department to officially report Kidan as missing. On Wednesday the 21st of December, the Lower Windsor Township Police Department would respond to a call made by a concerned guardian the day before, who was claiming that a teenager he'd been looking after for the past few months had been missing for 4 days and was worried for his safety. So, given how out of character this was for Kidan at the time, the police made sure to take the case very seriously right away. In fact, according to the Chief of Police, Jim Thomas, he had actually been Kidan's track coach in high school, stating that everybody knew Kidan and got along with him, so there was an immediate feeling of suspicion from the moment the case began. The detectives then decided to interview the family to see if they could potentially gather any useful leads to work with, and after speaking to Chris Foust, they uncovered that around 2 weeks before he disappeared, Kidan began working for the Delauter's A1 Moving Company, which was a detail that sparked their interest. But to add to this potential lead, the detectives had also been speaking to Cara, who stated in her interview that Kidan had actually visited the home of a co-worker in the days prior to his disappearance. So after Kidan vanished, she went to Pennsylvania and to the home Kidan had visited, but according to the man who answered the door, he didn't know who Kidan was and had no idea where he could be. So, with this information in mind, the police felt it would be useful to travel over to this home as well to see if this person could provide any further insights into the case. But after asking the man who lived there themselves if he had any information about Kadin Black, once again, he simply responded by saying he didn't even know who this person was and therefore couldn't provide any useful leads to work with. Now, although their suspicions towards this person were still there, the police realised that they had no probable cause to further interrogate this man, so they were forced to start looking at other angles, eventually leading them back to Kadin's guardian/landlord at the time, Chris Foust, as he appeared to be the last person to see him. Upon interviewing Chris, he would tell his story exactly the same as he had done during the previous conversation, explaining how Kadin had gone out Saturday evening and that he was unsure if he had returned back that night. But refusing to walk away, the police then kindly asked Chris if they could perform a search of the house to see if there was any evidence to work with, and right away Chris agreed and allowed them to conduct the search that same day. However, after searching the property inside and out, the detectives were able to uncover a key detail that would add yet another layer of controversy to this mysterious missing person case. On Friday the 23rd of December, the Lower Windsor Township detectives were able to obtain a warrant to access Kadin's cell phone data, and upon checking his recent activity, they were able to uncover that he had connected to the Foust family's Wi-Fi router on Sunday morning at approximately 9:33 am. This piece of evidence was huge at the time, as until then nobody knew if Kadin had returned home on the Saturday night. But this discovery seemed to illustrate that Kadin had returned and had then left the home on the Sunday morning. So, to further verify this new hypothesis, the police then asked the local neighbours to check their security cameras to see if they could spot Kadin walking down the street. But to their surprise, after checking every piece of surveillance footage from that day, the detectives were still unable to confirm if Kadin had in fact left the home that morning. If anything, this then raised their suspicion towards the Foust family even more, as if Kadin's cell phone was still in the house at 9:33 am, and there was no evidence to show that Kadin had returned home the night before. This seemed to raise the possibility of foul play being involved. But conscious that they had been spending most of their time conducting interviews and chasing leads, the police then decided to increase their search efforts, as by now it had been almost a week since Kadin was last officially seen. And as the days passed, the concern surrounding his disappearance was only growing in severity. So, using Kadin's cell phone data once again, they then attempted to trace his last known whereabouts through checking the coordinates of the cell phone's most recent ping. But what they would soon find out upon receiving the results would leave the entire police department scratching their heads. On Saturday the 24th of December, approximately 1 week after Kadin was last seen, the Lower Windsor Township Police, now working alongside the York County Sheriff's Department, conducted an official search within a 5 to 6 mile radius of where Kadin's cell phone had last pinged. According to the Chief of Police, air, land and water searches were performed with the support of many local organisations and agencies that specialise in search and rescue efforts. But despite their attempts to uncover more information, nothing of significance was ever found, leading the authorities with no other choice but to go back to the drawing board. A detective named Scott James from the York County Attorney General's office would then come forward to say he found the case to be incredibly puzzling, as during this period the town of Wrightsville had experienced incredibly adverse weather, with the local river being frozen over, negating any real possibility that Kadin could be in there. Basically, one night he's in the house and the next morning he's not. Detective James then went on to add, "We don't have anything pointing specifically to foul play, but we also don't have anything specific about any sort of accident either. It's just a big question mark." But determined not to give up, the authorities working alongside Kadin's friends and family would continue to search throughout the cold winter and continue to follow up on any leads they could find. But unfortunately, despite their persistent efforts, Kadin would elude discovery, leaving his family heartbroken and desperate for answers. However, just when everybody thought the case had gone cold, an extremely interesting piece of evidence would soon emerge, which would once again point the finger of blame at none other than Chris Foust. On Sunday the 25th of June, approximately 6 months after Kadin was first reported missing, a post was made to the Facebook marketplace by none other than Chris Foust, who had decided to take it upon himself to sell Kadin's Toyota 4Runner to the highest bidder. According to Cara Patterson, Chris then tried to claim that he had previously contacted Cara to try and sell it to her for $7,000, But this would prove to be a lie, as Kara would reveal that no such conversation ever occurred, as if it had, she would not have allowed Chris to make the sale. But an argument brought forward by Chris was that he had sunk thousands of dollars into improving the performance of the vehicle, and given that the car was technically under his name due to insurance purposes, he therefore had every right to sell it if he wanted to. However, it would appear that Kara was furious to say the least, as not only did Chris sell the vehicle without her permission and block her on Facebook, but he had also decided not to donate any of the money to the GoFundMe page set up to aid in the search for Kadin. So, with this extremely suspicious activity, the police would once again set their sights on Chris Foust, as the evidence was beginning to stack up against him, and without any other persons of interest, he had become the most likely suspect. However, despite another round of interrogation, just as before, Chris would claim his innocence, explaining that he needed the money for personal reasons and that he had every right to do whatever he wanted with a vehicle that was in his name. So unfortunately, after the authorities exhausted even more resources to further investigate the case, it would seem that their efforts would prove to be fruitless yet again, leaving the town of Wrightsville heartbroken, as despite their prayers, Kidan would continue to remain a missing person, as he does to this day. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But despite the rather bleak circumstances, Kadin's family continue to post about the case as often as they can over on the Find Kadin Black Facebook page, where they have been asking the public for help during this incredibly difficult time. Whilst scouring the details of this page, I actually noticed a post which mentioned a false tip around 8 months after Kadin's disappearance, where the police were told that he was spotted at a local scrapyard. But after interrogating the man he was supposedly with and checking the surveillance footage, they uncovered that this was nothing more than a hoax. So I didn't think it was worth digging into this lead any further, as it may be nothing more than a red herring. However, regardless of what you choose to believe, Kadin has now been officially missing for over 15 months at the time of recording. So given this fact, alongside the incredibly worrying circumstances that surround his disappearance, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of his safe return is only growing weaker as time passes. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, to kick things off, I wanted to start by looking into one of the more positive theories that has come out of this investigation, which is that Kadin could potentially still be alive out there somewhere. But first, is there any credence to this theory, or is it just a desperate attempt to cling onto hope? Well, I'd like to think that it is certainly possible Kadin could be hiding out somewhere. It was mentioned by Chris Foust that Kadin had been acting strange in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. So perhaps he was struggling with his mental health and just wanted to get away and start a new life. His mother Kara did mention in an interview with News Nation that Kadin suffered from episodes of depression from time to time, and given the fact that he had recently started a new job and would be heading to court in the new year to fight assault charges, you could understand if he felt like he was under an extreme amount of pressure. Also, Kadin had tried to live with his mother, father, and even his friend, so maybe this recent attempt to find a home was proving to be a failure once again, and so he decided the best course of action would be to move away entirely, leaving behind his old life in the process. However, let me just say I'm very aware of how far-fetched this theory sounds, as to do something so outrageous was not usual behaviour for Kadin. And despite the problems he did have with his family, he loved them deeply and would never leave them behind without so much as a goodbye. But a question that I don't think has been asked yet is, what if he is still alive, but is being held against his will? A topic we've touched on several times on this channel is the evil practice of human trafficking, which continues to remain prevalent in modern-day society despite the efforts of authorities to prevent it. So, could it be possible that Kadin was actually snatched that Saturday night? The police never found his cell phone, so perhaps he was supposed to be meeting somebody for the first time after speaking with them online, only to find out that they were actually hiding their true motives. This particular scheme is known as a honeypot, and is a very real situation that occurs to hundreds of Americans every year. So it could be possible that after meeting this individual, Kadin was sold off into the hidden world of human trafficking, which I'm aware sounds very dark, but in my opinion is one of the only plausible explanations that ends with Kadin actually still being alive. But if Kadin wasn't online dating at the time and didn't meet a stranger that night at a party or some other event, could his potential abduction have been conducted by somebody else? Perhaps somebody that he knew and trusted. Well, a reason I wanted to mention the fake police tip earlier, despite its proven falsehood, was because it got me thinking about how Kadin could be potentially hiding out somewhere in a house. I saw a post made by Kara who stated that the Fausts have a family property in a rural area some hours away from Wrightsville, and she finds it curious as to why police haven't found a good enough reason to search this second property. Surely that could be a possibility if he ran away or someone was hiding him. Now, I can neither confirm or deny these claims to be the case, but if what Kara says is true, could the Foust family be more involved than they have led the police to believe? Well, one point to make here is that if they had enough money to spend on improving the performance of Kadin's Toyota 4Runner, why were they so desperate for money less than a year later in June, to the point where they had to sell it and couldn't donate 1 cent to the search efforts? Also, it would seem that Chris even lied about offering to sell it to Kara first, which is incredibly suspicious in my opinion and cannot be explained away. In addition, Kara would also state that she had no idea about all of the payments that Chris was making to repair the vehicle. As far as she was aware, the car was supposed to be Kadin's responsibility, and the only reason Chris was associated with it at all was because he was providing Kadin with a cheaper deal on his car insurance. So although technically it was his to sell on paper, you would think that any good person would ask for permission before making such a decision, especially when the car is associated with a missing person case. Also, surely Chris would have been aware of the suspicion this choice would have brought onto his head, but maybe the car was a constant reminder of the guilt he felt towards the situation, and he couldn't bear to see it on his driveway any longer. You can take that comment as you will. But if Chris and the rest of the Foust family were involved in Kadin's disappearance, let's just say I don't think anybody would be too shocked. I'm aware the family did a kind thing to take Kadin in, but in my personal opinion, their suspicious behaviour outweighs their positive actions, as I now find myself questioning if they could have potentially had ulterior motives when they agreed to let Kadin live with them in the first place. However, what I will say is that I saw an interesting comment on a News Nation video that mentioned how the Fausts had taken in an 18-year-old with pending felony charges, and even paid for his lawyer, his food, his room, and car repairs, to name a few. They also took him four-wheeling, the gym, and much more. So in this commenter's opinion, the car sale is being blown way out of proportion, as the Fausts only sold it to recoup money because Chris was medically disabled from work. Now, I cannot verify any of these points, but I thought it would only be fair to mention them in order to provide an unbiased view of the situation. But regardless of how I personally feel about it, this commenter does raise an interesting point about the impending felony charges, which leads me on to the next theory. Could the incident with the school bus driver that Kadin experienced a few months before he went missing have in some way been connected to his disappearance? Well, as I mentioned earlier on in this video, Kadin had actually been summoned to attend a court-appointed hearing in January of 2023 to contend these charges for assault, as he felt he was acting in self-defense. According to Cara Patterson, there is camera footage of the incident that she has physically seen herself, in which Kadin was asked to go back to his assigned seat after switching seats and refusing to listen to orders. Apparently, the bus driver then proceeded to pull over on Route 30, demanding that Kadin get off the bus onto the busy highway. But when Kadin refused, the bus driver then grabbed and ripped out some of Kadin's hair, to which he then reacted by defending himself against what he felt was an attack. In Cara's opinion, there is no excuse for how that bus driver reacted to Kadin's defiance of assigned seating, and she is unsure why the bus driver was not reprimanded or charged as well. Also adding, she fully believes the school district need to be held accountable for the poor handling of the incident. So, based on what Cara states, it would seem that Kadin was very confident that he was going to win this court case, especially given the fact that there was camera footage proving he was innocent. So, with this in mind, could it be possible that the bus driver may be a suspect? Well, it's certainly plausible, as if the bus driver anticipated that he was about to lose his job and potentially be charged for attacking a school student, Perhaps he felt pressured into making Kadin disappear to protect himself. Now, this is of course nothing more than speculation, and there is absolutely no evidence to back up this theory. However, I do think it's interesting that Kadin would disappear just 1 month prior to the court case, as well as the fact that Christmas was right around the corner and he had made plans to stay with his family back in Maryland. However, it would seem that despite this huge wealth of evidence that the authorities and the family have been able to uncover so far in the investigation, we are still no closer to finding out what really happened to Kadin Black. So I truly hope that some more evidence gets uncovered soon, as I can only imagine the desperation that Kadin's family are feeling right now. With this in mind, I'd like to quickly shout out the GoFundMe page that was set up by a friend of Kadin's family, as I fear without a private investigator, his case may continue to go unsolved, which I think we can all agree is something that needs to change. So please donate what you can. I will leave a link to the GoFundMe in the description. And if you would like to show your support to the family yourself, I will also leave a link to their Facebook page where you can read up further on the case if you're interested. But anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. And as always, if you have any theories of your own which you think may explain what happened to Kadin Black, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you found this story interesting, feel free to check out the video on screen now, which details the case of Tomontes Hurt, who was another 19-year-old person of colour that mysteriously disappeared after being captured in this severely concerning surveillance footage.